Let's start with board A. Use M3 by A screws and M3 nuts to install the gas sensor on the area of number 3 and the RIP motion sensor on number 2. Stick the LED light strip on the top of the board like what I do. Fix the 4x4 Matrix Array Membrane Keypad on number 1 and pull its light out from the other side. Follow my shot to install board I on board A. Place 2 ABS wide insulation columns on M3 by 200 screw and then install board I with M3 nuts. Attach Dupont lines to these modules. Now let's move to next part. Wire the ultrasonic sensor up with a Dupont line of 35 cm for pin. Follow what I do to install it on number A of board K with M1.4 by A screws and M1.4 nuts. Connect the 4-corner LED module with a 4-pin 35 cm Dupont line and then fix these two modules on number 9 and number 10 with M3 by 8 screws and M3 nuts. Now let's move to board L. Install the I2C1602 LCD display module on number 11 with M3 by 8 screws and M3 nuts, and then wire it up. And then wire these modules up. Now let's move to board N. Use M3 by 8 screws and M3 nuts to install the analog rotation sensor on number 16 and the steam sensor on number 17 respectively. Install an adjusted servo on number 19 with M2 by 16 screws and M2 nuts and ABS white insulation columns. Note: initialize them, say in the tutorial, before installing 3 servos. Fix the plastic cross bracket on the wooden gill and install this combination on the servo with M2 by 4 screw. Install copper pillars on the board with M3 by 8 screws. Then fix the O board on N board with M3 by 10 screws and M3 self-locking nuts. Note that the gills of the O board should be properly jointed with the wooden gill, and do not fix the self-locking nuts tight. And then wire these modules up. Let's move to board M. Use M3 by 8 screws and M3 nuts to install the temperature and humidity sensor on number 14. the ambient light sensor on number 15. And the white LED module on the other side of number 12. Install the second servo on number 13 with M2 by 16 screws and M2 nuts and ABS white insulation columns. Fix the plastic cloth bracket on board E with M1.2 by 4 screws. And then place this board E on the servo with M2 by 4 screws. Install the main board on board M with M3 by 12 screws, M3 nuts, and ABS white insulation columns. Then wire all these modules up. Now let's move to board C. Install 4 motor mounts on board C with M3 by 8 screws. And then fix motors with M3 by 30 screws and M3 nuts. assemble wheels to the motors. Fix the battery holder on the other side of number 7 with M3 by 12 screws and M3 nuts. Install M3 by 20 copper pillars first with M3 by 8 screws. And fix the light tracking sensor on number 6 with M3 by 8 screws. Wire it up. Let's move to board B. First, use M3 by 8 screws and M3 nuts to install the digital push button module on number 19. Note that the power amplifier module can be rotated to alter volume. And fix the plastic cloth bracket on board H. Install the third servo on number 5 with M2 by 10 screws and M2 nuts. And then fix the board H on the servo with M2 by 4 screws. Stick the other LED light strip on number 21. Wire all these modules up. It's time to follow what I do in this video to assemble all these boards together to make a car.